He didn't marry her because he loved her. He married her because she was desperate, and desperation is easy to buy. On the day of the wedding, there were no flowers, no guests, no smiles, just a pen, a contract, and a man who believed everything in life had a price, including her. She noticed something before anyone else did. The deal was signed before the vows were spoken. That told her everything she needed to know. The lawyer slid the papers across the table. The millionaire didn't even glance at her. His pen moved fast, confident, like he'd done this 100 times before, closing deals, acquiring assets, controlling outcomes. She sat quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered. To anyone watching, she looked grateful, small, lucky. But inside her chest, something hard and steady was forming, because this wasn't a marriage, it was leverage. 3 months earlier, he had found her through an assistant, not by accident. Men like him never found people by accident. She was working 2 jobs then, barely sleeping, drowning in bills that never stopped coming. Her mother's medical reports were stacked in a drawer she couldn't bring herself to open anymore. And he needed something. Not love, not companionship, a wife on paper. The terms were painfully clear. 1 year of marriage, public appearances, silence, absolute discretion. In return, her debts would vanish. Her mother would receive the treatment no insurance would cover. At the end of 12 months, she'd walk away with enough money to start a life she'd never been allowed to imagine. No intimacy, he'd said during their first meeting, his voice calm, controlled. No emotions. I don't want complications. She had nodded, not because she agreed, but because pride doesn't pay hospital bills. So now, on that quiet Thursday afternoon, when the officiant cleared his throat and spoke words that felt borrowed and empty, she said, "I do," without hesitation. The ring slid onto her finger, heavy, cold, too expensive to feel real. He didn't smile. When it was over, he stood immediately, adjusting his suit like this was just another meeting on his calendar. "You'll stay in the guest wing," he said, already halfway turned away. "The staff's been informed. You'll have everything you need." She looked up at him for the first time that day. "Everything?" she asked softly. He paused, just a fraction of a second. His eyes scanned her face, calculating. "Within reason," he replied. That was how he saw the world. Everything had limits. Everything had a price. The house was enormous, too quiet, the kind of silence that made you aware of your own breathing. A staff member led her through hallways lined with artwork that looked untouched, unlived in, like the house itself was pretending to be a home. That night, she sat alone on the edge of a bed larger than her old apartment. She didn't cry. Instead, she removed the ring and placed it carefully on the nightstand. Then she lay back, staring at the ceiling. 1 year, she told herself. Just 1 year. He kept his promises. He was polite, distant, professional. At breakfast, he read financial reports instead of looking at her. At public dinners, he spoke just enough to appear attentive. His hand rested lightly at her back for cameras, never longer than necessary. He never asked her opinion, never asked about her past, never asked how she was settling in. She existed in his life the way a signature existed on a contract, necessary but meaningless once obtained. And at first, that was fine. She observed quietly, learned the rhythm of the house, the routines, the habits, the blind spots. She noticed how he stayed awake long after midnight, alone in his study, how the piano in the living room was tuned every week, yet never touched, how his jaw tightened whenever his father's name came up. He assumed she wasn't paying attention. That was his first mistake. The second came 6 weeks later. At a charity dinner, surrounded by crystal glasses and rehearsed laughter, someone joked about women who married for money. Their eyes flicked toward her, smiling without warmth. The millionaire chuckled. He didn't correct them. He didn't defend her. Something shifted inside her then. Not anger, something colder, more deliberate. That night, when the house finally went quiet, she didn't return to the guest wing. She knocked on the door of his study. He looked up, surprised, annoyed. "Yes," he said. "I need access." "To what?" His brows furrowed. "To the foundation accounts," she replied calmly. "If I'm expected to appear as your wife, I need to know where the money goes. People ask questions." He leaned back in his chair, studying her differently now. "That's not part of the deal. That's not part of the deal. Neither was being humiliated in public," she said quietly. Silence filled the room. Then he smiled, slow, amused. "You're overstepping." "Then stop stepping on me," she replied. For the first time since the wedding, he didn't dismiss her. He hesitated. And that hesitation, that tiny fracture in his control, was enough, because she wasn't just surviving the deal anymore. She was learning how to use it, and the man who thought he had bought silence had no idea what she was already preparing to do next. He didn't give her access that night, but he didn't say no either. That alone told her something important. Men like him didn't hesitate unless they were recalculating. The next morning, an assistant knocked on her door with a tablet and a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Hale has granted you limited viewing access," she said. "Only summaries, no transfers." Limited. Controlled. Still, access. She thanked her, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen. Numbers filled it, columns, percentages, charitable allocations that looked impressive at first glance. But she'd learned something in her old life. Numbers lied beautifully. She read slowly, carefully, the way you read when you know something is being hidden from you and you're patient enough to wait for it to slip. The foundation funded hospitals, schools, research programs, public-facing, polished, safe. But buried beneath that were smaller entries, private grants, shell organizations with noble names and vague descriptions. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she became useful. At events, she listened more than she spoke. When donors approached, she remembered names, children, illnesses, anniversaries. She followed up with handwritten notes, something no one else bothered to do. People started mentioning her. "She's surprisingly thoughtful," someone said once, thinking she was out of earshot. The millionaire noticed. He noticed when donors lingered longer at their table, when conversation softened around her, when doors opened without him pushing. "You're doing well," he said one evening, pouring himself a drink in the study. Not praise, an observation. "I'm doing my job," she replied. He smirked. "You're exceeding expectations." She met his gaze. "You set them very low." For a moment, he almost smiled. Almost. Weeks passed, then months, and somewhere between the third charity gala and the fourth board dinner, something changed, not in him, but in the house. The staff stopped treating her like a temporary guest. Her preferences were remembered, her schedule respected. She was consulted, quietly, on things that used to bypass her completely. She saw it for what it was. Power shifting doesn't announce itself, it whispers. One afternoon, she stood in the library, staring at a portrait she'd passed dozens of times without really seeing. A younger version of him stood beside an older man, his father. The resemblance was undeniable, but the expressions were not. His father's gaze was cold, possessive. His, guarded. "You don't like that painting," he said from behind her. She turned. "It doesn't like me." He studied the portrait. "My father believed fear was the most efficient motivator." "And you?" she asked. He considered the question. "I believe in control." She nodded. "They're not that different." That night, she went back to the foundation summaries. This time, she cross-referenced them with public filings, news articles, old legal disputes no one talked about anymore. Patterns emerged. Money moved in circles. Influence followed it. And there it was, a private facility, not a hospital, not a school, a rehabilitation center tied to one of the shell organizations. She recognized the name. Her breath caught not from shock, but recognition. She'd been there once, years ago, not as a patient, as a witness. She closed the tablet slowly, her fingers trembling just enough to notice. So that was it. That was what he was protecting. The next dinner was smaller, intimate, board members and spouses only, candlelight, expensive wine. Someone asked how they'd met. He answered smoothly, the version he'd rehearsed. She smiled at the right moments. Then she spoke. "We met because he needed me, and because I needed him." A few laughs followed, nervous ones. She turned to him. "Funny how honesty sounds like a joke, isn't it?" His jaw tightened. Later in the car, silence stretched between them. "You embarrassed me," he said finally. "I clarified," she replied. "There's a difference. You're forgetting the terms of our agreement." "No," she said softly. "I'm honoring them." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something unreadable flickered behind his eyes. The next day he canceled 2 meetings. That evening he invited her into the study again. "I want to adjust the deal," he said. She didn't respond immediately. "Go on," she said after a moment. "You'll get full access. In exchange, you stop pushing." She tilted her head. "Pushing what?" He hesitated. Again. "That part of my life is off limits." She leaned forward. "You mean the rehabilitation center?" The room went very still. "How do you know about that?" he asked. She met his gaze, calm, steady. "Because I was there," she said, "and because not everything you bury stays buried." For the first time she'd known him, his control cracked, just a little. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "No, I'm correcting one." She stood. "The deal still stands. 1 year, silence, discretion." She paused at the door. "But don't confuse silence with ignorance." That night she didn't sleep, not because she was afraid, because she was finally awake. He had married her for convenience, for optics, for control. But control only works when the other person doesn't understand the system. And now, she understood it better than he ever expected. The next morning, the house felt different. Not louder, not colder, sharper. People smiled the same way, spoke the same way, but every movement felt measured, as if the walls themselves were listening. He avoided her. Not obviously, not rudely, strategically. Meetings ran late, dinners were postponed, messages were delivered through assistants instead of directly. It was a classic maneuver, distance as discipline. He thought silence would slow her. It didn't. It gave her room. She spent her days doing what she'd always done best, observing without being noticed. The staff schedules, the driver's rotations, the way certain calls were taken in private rooms, while others were answered openly. One name kept appearing, a man who never came to the house, but whose decisions echoed through it. By the end of the week, she knew exactly how the rehabilitation center worked, not officially, but truth rarely lives in official explanations. It was a place people were sent when they became inconvenient. employees who knew too much, relatives who refused to stay quiet, women who didn't sign the papers they were supposed to. Reputation washed clean, voices softened, memories reframed. Legally untouchable, morally rotten. She didn't confront him again, not yet. Instead, she changed tactics. At the next charity event, she spoke, not loudly, not dramatically, but intentionally, about transparency, about accountability, about how real impact required visibility, not just generosity. People listened, not because she was powerful, but because she was calm. There was something unsettling about someone who spoke with certainty, without anger. By the time they returned home, her name had been mentioned twice in conversations he wasn't part of. That night, he finally broke. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, standing in the doorway of her room. She looked up from her book. "Games have rules," she replied. "This is just reality." "You think exposure gives you leverage?" "I think truth does," she said. "Exposure is just a consequence." He stepped closer. "You could lose everything." She closed the book slowly. "So could you." That was when he realized it. She wasn't bluffing, and she wasn't trying to win. She was trying to finish something. Days later, she received a message from an unknown number. One sentence. "You don't remember me, but I remember you." Her hands didn't shake. She replied, "I remember you." They met in a quiet cafe, far from the city, far from cameras. The woman looked older than she should have, not from age, from caution. "I thought I was alone," the woman said. "You weren't. You just weren't supposed to know that." They talked for hours. Names were exchanged, dates confirmed, stories aligned. The pattern was undeniable. By the time she returned home, the decision had already been made. He sensed it. "You're leaving," he said that evening, not asking. "Not yet, but soon." "You can't just walk away." She smiled faintly. "You married me for a deal, not ownership. You signed. I honored everything I promised. I stayed, I smiled, I protected your image." She stepped closer. "You never promised to protect people." Silence fell between them again, but this time it wasn't a tactic. It was surrender disguised as restraint. The following week, an investigation quietly began. No press, no headlines, just questions, requests, files being reopened. He tried to stop it. He couldn't. She never appeared in public statements, never claimed credit, never accused him directly. She didn't need to. Systems collapse fastest when they're forced to look at themselves. On the last night of the deal, she packed a single suitcase. He stood at the foot of the stairs, watching. "You planned this from the start," he said. "No," she replied. "I adapted." "What did you want from me?" he asked, voice lower now, tired. She thought for a moment. "Nothing," she said. "That's what scared you." She paused, then added, "You married me thinking I'd be quiet, grateful, dependent." She met his eyes one last time. "You never asked what I survived before I met you." She left before dawn. Months later, his foundation still existed, but not the way it used to. Too many eyes, too many rules, too much truth. As for her, she didn't disappear. She just stopped being convenient. And that, more than anything she exposed, was what shocked him the most. He didn't hear from her again. Not directly. No calls, no messages, no dramatic confrontations. Just absence. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. The deal was over. The year had ended exactly as outlined. Clean, legal, contained. That's what he told the board. That's what he told the press. That's what he told himself. But absence has a sound. It echoes. The house felt larger without her, not emptier, larger, as if the walls had been pushed back, exposing how little warmth they'd ever held. The staff moved the same way, spoke the same way, but something subtle had changed. They no longer looked at him first. They looked past him. At breakfast, he reached for his tablet out of habit. The screen lit up with reports, forecasts, numbers that once grounded him. They didn't anymore. He found himself staring at the piano one evening, the same piano he'd ignored for years. He lifted the cover, pressed a single key. The sound was off, not wrong, just unsteady, like everything else. 3 months later, the investigation stopped being quiet, not explosive, not scandalous, methodical. Funding structures were revised. Several private programs were restructured. A few executives resigned for personal reasons. No one said her name. They didn't have to. People inside the system understood what had happened. She hadn't attacked it. She'd redirected it. He learned that the rehabilitation center was being converted into a public medical facility, new leadership, external oversight, survivors invited to speak, not as witnesses, but as advisors. The first time he read that, his hands tightened around the report, not in anger, in something closer to recognition. She had never wanted revenge. She wanted correction. One afternoon, a familiar envelope arrived at his office. No return address, just his name, written neatly, deliberately. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no signature, just one sentence. I didn't destroy what you built. I made it harder for you to hide behind it. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of his desk, the same drawer where the original marriage contract still sat, untouched. That night he went home earlier than usual. He walked through the guest wing without thinking, stopped outside the room she'd used. The door was locked, but he remembered what it looked like inside. Minimal, orderly, nothing wasted, just space. Weeks later, he saw her name again, not in gossip columns, not in financial news, in a small article about a new nonprofit, one focused on legal advocacy for people silenced by institutions too powerful to challenge alone. She wasn't listed as founder. She was listed as strategic advisor. He smiled then, a real one, brief, quiet. That was her way. Power without needing credit. One evening, months after the deal ended, he attended a fundraiser alone. Cameras flashed, questions were asked. Someone mentioned his brief marriage in passing. "Do you regret it?" a reporter asked. He paused. "No," he said finally. "It taught me something important." What was that? He thought of her, standing in the study, calm and unafraid, the way she'd spoken truth without raising her voice, the way she'd walked away without needing permission. "That control isn't the same as strength," he said. The reporter nodded, satisfied, and moved on. He stayed there for a moment longer, staring into nothing. Across the city, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. The office was small, shared, alive with quiet purpose. Someone laughed in the next room. Someone argued passionately over strategy. She checked her phone. No missed calls. Good. She didn't need closure from him. She'd already taken what mattered. Dignity, choice, direction. That night, as she locked up and stepped into the cool air, she slipped a ring off her finger, the same ring she'd kept all this time, not out of sentiment, but reminder. She placed it in a donation box near the door, for a legal aid fund, for someone else who might need leverage one day. She walked away without looking back, and the man who had once believed he could buy silence finally understood what had shocked him all along. She had never been part of the deal. She had been the consequence. Some stories end with answers. Others leave you sitting in silence, thinking. If this one stayed with you, if it made you pause for even a moment, you already know why you're here. Tell me this in the comments. Was she right to walk away without ever looking back? And if you want more stories like this, quiet, unsettling, and hard to